What's up? How you doing? Here we are. Beautiful night tonight. Beautiful night. And tonight I have boxing on my mind. I'm in the mood for a good championship fight. Does not have to be heavyweight. It could be middleweight, welterweight, super middleweight. It doesn't matter as long as it's a good one. I want to have the right environment. Finger food, chicken wings, buffalo wings, whatever you want to call them, nice and spicy, some meatballs, and good beverages, and watching a good fight. I miss those days. There was a time when me and my father would gather in the kitchen every Tuesday. I mean, we were there other times too, but Tuesday we had to be there, and we watched Tuesday night fights. Tuesday night fights with Nick Charles and Sean O'Grady. Loved listening to those two guys, especially Sean O'Grady. And we'd watch unknown fighters, unknown to us. We didn't know who they were. I'm sure their mothers knew them, but we had no idea who they were, and it was a good time. We'd have some food in the kitchen, maybe a bowl of chips, maybe some popcorn, and we'd watch the fights. And I miss those days. But me and my father watched all the fights, championship fights, going all the way back to Ali versus Frazier. And we watched Ali Foreman, Ken Norton. I love that fighter. Great fighter. They robbed him. He should have won that Ali fight. I think they fought 3 times or something, but he beat him, I think, all 3 times. He was a great fighter, and they did call him the uncrowned champion, and he was. He's not around anymore, but yeah, Ken Norton was always one of my favorites. I remember fight night, nervous. You know, I would be so nervous. I can't even describe how it was. It was as if I was getting in the ring. Exactly the same feeling. And then the fight would start, and it was like the best 12 rounds, and before that was 15. But it was unexplainable, the excitement. And then I went out to Vegas first time, and there was a fight. Tommy Hitman Hearns versus Virgil Hill. I said, I got to see that. I had basically no money on me, like very little. But I went and I found a ticket for $50, and I bought it, and I went to the fight, and I was like four rows from the top. So all the way, everybody looked about that big at the bottom there fighting, and very exciting. I was like so into it. I said, this is stuff I see on television, and it was a Caesar's Palace, which is, most of those fights in those days were in the parking lot of Caesar's Palace. Now, we've come a long way since then. Now places have air conditioning, they're arenas, they're enclosed, so it's very comfortable. There's no smoking inside. Remember the old days, everybody in the place was smoking. Now, if it was outside like it was in Caesar's Palace, it didn't really matter. But the heat back then, you know, it was dry, but still it was hot. And we used to get all those fights, every single one of them. I tell my father, hey, there's a fight coming up. And he'd say, get the phone, call up, get it. So I would get the fight. And prior to that, it was Wide World of Sports. So they were commercial paid for. But yeah, I miss those days when you could sit down and watch good fights. Boxing has been on a decline for a few years now. UFC has come in. You know, it's an enjoyable event to watch UFC. I'm not that into it as much as I was into boxing. I prefer standing up, fighting, clean shots, you know, this position, or if you're, you know, lefty in that position. And, you know, that's it. Clean fighting, uppercuts, straight, hooks, all that. I enjoy that a bit more than, you know, when you see them, you know, kind of punching, and then they get on the ground and they start wrestling and choking. That's great. Awesome self-defense. You can't beat that form of fighting for self-defense and things like that. But when it comes to watching a sport, I prefer boxing. The visual of it, just everything about it speaks to me more than the way they fight in the UFC. Although, once again, the UFC, when it comes to self-defense and things like that, dominates. I mean, you cannot beat a UFC fighter. He will choke you out before you know what happened. It'd be right around the back of you with the forearm around here, or he'll have your arm stretched out to the point where it's ready to break. But like I said, when it comes to watching the sport of fighting, I prefer the boxing stance and the way, it goes down in the ring with boxers. One time I was in Vegas, and there was a big UFC fight. Conor McGregor was fighting, and we didn't know much about him back then. So then we were leaving Vegas, and I usually stop at the gas stations down by Prim. And I went in there, it was a Chevron, and I was getting gas, and 99% of the people there were from Ireland that had flown in to watch Conor McGregor fight. Now, when it comes to boxing, he just doesn't have it. I don't know what it is, but I don't know how long it would take to train a UFC guy to throw punches the correct way, but they don't throw them in a way that can beat a boxer. I mean, if you go equal, I'm not talking about a UFC guy at the top and some boxer guy who's like a schmuck. I'm talking about equal, champion versus champion. That's if you fight a UFC guy in the boxing ring. Now, if you take the boxer in the UFC octagon, it's done within, 30 seconds maybe, unless the boxer can avoid getting down on the ground somehow. But eventually you're going to be on the ground and you're going to have a forearm around your throat. But when it comes to boxing, UFC fighters, for some reason, cannot transition into fighting like that to beat a boxer. It happens. I'm sure UFC guys have fought in the ring and have beaten boxers. But when it comes to the high-end boxing game, you get like a top guy from the UFC, top guy in boxing, and put them together in the boxing ring. I'm not talking about UFC now. The boxer usually wins. So, and like I said, visually I prefer it. I prefer that kind of fighting. Nice clean shots, a bit of holding once in a while, but ultimately it's clean fighting. So, and I do, enjoy watching UFC. Once in a while I will put something on YouTube or whatever, but I don't get that excitement that I would get when I would watch a professional championship fight in boxing. It just doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. But if you want good self-defense, grappling, you cannot beat it. You cannot beat it. I can't think of any better way of fighting, in the streets. So, but for a sport, I prefer watching boxers box and fight that way. Water is Fiji water. So I'm having some. Anyway, I wish, I could go to a place that I used to go once in a while. In the past, there were these places you can go and watch amateur fighting, amateur boxing, and they had these round tables, and you would sit there with a bunch of people, simpatico people, and you would order finger food, and you would watch these amateur fighters come out and, and do a little bit of boxing. You'd cheer them on, everything. And then when the Olympic Auditorium was being refurbished, this is way back in the 90s, that's where they shot the Rocky fight for the film Rocky. So they said, hey, in the old days, we used to get fights here all the time, professional fights, and people would come on like a Friday or a Saturday night, and they'd watch 5 or 6 fights, and then they'd go home, and it was an enjoyable time. Well, they said that we haven't done that in decades. So somebody decided that they were going to refurbish the Olympic Auditorium inside. So after months and months of rebuilding and fixing and painting and all of that, I decided to visit. So I showed up there, the door was open, I went inside and I walked around and they had nice seats everywhere. The ring, when I went in that day, the ring was being newly restored and I could see them down there tightening the ropes up. And I go, this is going to be awesome. This is going to be awesome. So what they were planning on doing, they were going to bring fighters, boxers, and they were going to have fights weekly. And it just didn't catch on. You know, this is kind of like at the beginning of the boxing downhill turn. And nobody was going. I was very excited. I go, this is a place that I want to be coming once, you know, maybe once a month or so, getting a seat here, getting a beverage, getting a hot dog, whatever. And then watching some of these unknown professionals. But after a few years of that, did not catch on. They had to shut it down. And now when you drive by, it has become a Korean church. So I don't even think now the inside looks the same anymore. But I am happy that I actually got to see it before it became a church, while it was still a boxing venue. And man, I was so excited, you know, and you know, also that it was the place where they filmed the Rocky Apollo fight. Or actually the Apollo Rocky fight, because Apollo was a champion back then. But it did not catch on. But in my younger days, I would go and I would see these amateur fights. You know, yeah, good sport as long as you don't overdo it. In other words, you don't stay too long and, you know, have way too many fights, the accumulation of the damage, and then you pay a price, a big price. But the funny thing with boxing is, I don't know, not everybody pays the price. You have guys that fought 70 fights and they seem fine. You're talking to them, there's no slurring, everything coming out right. Then there's other guys who have fought maybe 30, 40 fights and they have issues. You know, they can't tie their shoes, they can't dress themselves, they can't think, they have a hard time getting words out. So it affects everybody differently. I remember years ago I read that there was some kind of genetic predisposition to being more susceptible to ending up that way if you were a boxer. And you know, I mean, you saw George Foreman, who died not too long ago. I don't know what issues he had. I don't know, you know, I mean, it's not like they come out and they brag about him. But when you would hear him speak, you know, you didn't hear him like, you know, Ken Norton or Ali or something like that. And he had a lot of fights, and he sounded fine, you know. But there's a lot of guys that have fought for years and years and years, and not much of an issue. Marvin Hagler was one, you know. Marvin Hagler died not too long ago, but when he would be interviewed and he would speak, he was coherent, you know. His words were well pronounced. Then you go to Tommy Hearns, and you can tell there's issues there. He's having a hard time talking, a bit slurry, and it's only going to get worse. So, you know, very sad. Tommy Hitman Hearns, great fighter. He was throwing bombs from like way back here somewhere. Very long arms. They would hit you from like a block away. Great fighter. And of course, best fight, Marvin Hagler versus Tommy Hitman Hearns. 3 rounds of actual war. It was crazy. I saw that and I was looking at it, I go, how are they keeping up the stamina? You know, I mean, they should be exhausted. But great fight, and of course, Hagler won that. Sugar Ray Leonard, I don't know what he's got, high 30s. I don't remember how many fights he's had, but it's maybe 40, maybe, right? He speaks well. He's an intelligent guy. You know, I don't know what's coming down the line, but so far he sounds great. And, you know, there's others, Alexis Arguello, who had big issues. And then the other guy, what was his name there? The guy that fought Ali several times. Can't think of his name, but he was a fighter out here in California, and by the time he was in his 40s, he was done mentally. And then in his early 50s, he couldn't dress himself. His brother had to help him dress himself. He couldn't remember anything about his career. but I can't think of his name right now, and I know him well. What's his name? Jerry. I don't know why Jerry's coming to mind. I will mention Jerry Cooney. Jerry Cooney seems to be pretty much there. You know, I don't know. I mean, he's a lot older looking now. Looks different. I remember the Jerry Cooney of old, the dark hair, did the Norelco commercial with that fake mom. But yeah, that fight that he had with Larry Holmes, man, that was overhyped. Overhyped. Of course, they played the race card on, not the race card, but they made it look like it was race against race to sell tickets, and it really wasn't. You know, it's like ridiculous when people do that. I am so against all that stuff, but they did it. They want to sell tickets, so they made it look like it was one of those things, but it wasn't. Jerry Cooney, really nice guy. Jerry Quarry, that's the guy I was thinking of before. Very nice guy. Actually, Larry Holmes and Jerry Cooney are really good friends. And I am a huge fan of Larry Holmes. That's who was champ when I was kind of like really, really, you know, watching this stuff. And I thought he was going to go on forever. I never thought Michael Spinks, I was going to say Leon, but Michael Spinks was going to beat him. Now, I agree. He did beat him in that first fight, so he kind of stopped that I'm getting Marciano's record thing. But on the second fight, where Larry Holmes had the rematch, Larry Holmes beat him fair and square, and they still gave Spinks the win, and he didn't win that second fight. You know, great fighter, a bit awkward. I think that's his main thing, the awkwardness. Then he fought Tyson, and Tyson took him out in 91 seconds. And then I think he retired. But he sounds a little dizzy. I mean, he's still there, but he sounds way different. His voice is different now. I mean, his brother's gone. I think he died a few years ago. But Michael Spinks was the more responsible of the two. Had a few good fights. He was the first one back then to move from light heavyweight to the heavyweight, challenge the current champion and win. The only one. I remember Larry Holmes goes, that's never happened before, and it's not going to happen to me. And it happened to him. But when Larry Holmes came back and he fought the second time, they robbed him. They robbed him. He won that fight. So, you know, very sad when they do that in boxing. There should be a jury panel or something that overrides a ridiculous decision, because I've watched many, many fights, more than the average person. And I've seen it happen quite a few times where you go, it's so obvious this guy won, and the judges go with the other guy. I don't know if it's the angle, but whatever it is, there's got to be a way to overturn ridiculous decisions. But Jerry Quarry, very solid fighter, strong upper body. I mean, he would hit hard. Could not beat Ali. Ali was just a little bit better, but he could hit hard. And then he got hit with dementia. Now, it could be that he has the genes to develop dementia in the first place, and boxing just helped it along. But yeah, he got it bad. He got it bad. I mean, he was actually fighting when it was so obvious that he had dementia, and they were still allowing him to fight. He needed the money, so they would say, okay, go fight. And just got worse and worse. And he died, you know, very young. I think it was in his 50s. But yeah, I mean, the lighter weight divisions, they don't see as much of that, you know, brain damage due to the punches. But the heavyweights, and it was sad with Ali. Ali may have gotten that anyway. He may have ended up with Parkinson's. Michael J. Fox was not a fighter, and he ended up with, you know, Parkinson's at a very young age. So it happens to people, and you know, it could be that you're going to get it anyway, and you happen to be a boxer. But yeah, his was like very hard to watch. The you know, the way he would talk in the 60s with quickness, you know, clever rhyming stuff, and then all of a sudden you see him around 78 or so, and he's like slowing down with the speech. He's having a hard time thinking. And then when you see him in the 90s, much, much worse. In the 2000s, whatever it's like. And there's got to be something. There's got to be a drug or something that can not reverse, but maybe, reverse. Why not? Why not reverse? So yeah, when I see the old clips of Ali in the '60s before he was fighting, for the championship there, he was a fast talker, had a lot of energy, and then you see him, 30 years later, and totally different man. So. Yeah, they went down to 12 rounds from 15, and they said that their research said that those 3 rounds at the end were the ones that caused the most damage. So we'll see. We're actually seeing now. I don't know if there's a statistic out there that shows fewer boxers with brain damage due to the fact that they shortened the fights to 12 rounds. I hope that's the case. Yeah, in the old days, they would go, I'm talking about way back, they would go until somebody got knocked out. 30, 40 rounds later, they're still fighting. It's like, how much can you go? And then they shortened it to like, I forget what it was. It became 15. 15 was the gold standard. 15, and that's a long time. You go in there throwing punches for 15 rounds. Unless you've ever done it, you don't realize how much energy is taken up in those 3 rounds when you're throwing punches like that. It takes a lot of energy. But, and then you see from like 13, 14, 15, those rounds, bombs are falling, and those guys are like barely making it. And I'm glad Rocky came out when the rule was still 15 rounds, because 12 rounds is, it's like a little bit disappointing. When I watch fights now, it's over, 12 rounds. So, they try and improve things. The only way to improve it is avoid getting hit. But somebody's going to get hit. Somebody's going to get hit. Otherwise, how do you win a fight? Fresh water. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I know one fight that really, really annoyed me when I saw it. And this had nothing to do with American boxing. It was for the Olympics. Roy Jones Jr. I was watching that fight. Man, it's like it was yesterday. And I had the TV on. I'm watching the fight. And it's so obvious. This is like it's like crystal clear. I can't even tell you how obvious it is. Like, you can't find the metaphor accurate enough to describe how obvious it was that Roy Jones Jr. beat the Korean fighter. And at the end, I go, they're just going to raise his hand and he's going to go home the winner. And they announced the Korean guy, and he won. And it was like, look at Roy Jones's expression, disappointment. I was disappointed, and I didn't even have any, stake in the fight. So I'm looking at that and I go, what a disappointment. And then they did an investigation, and it turned out corruption. That guy was getting hit so hard, he wasn't responding, with counter punches. Roy Jones handled him as if, Roy Jones was the adult and he was the, 10-year-old. So at the end, they announced the Korean fighter won the fight. And I'm like, ridiculous. And then Roy Jones, turns out that, he became one of the best fighters of all time. And I'm talking about early on, not now, where he had the exhibition fight with Mike Tyson. I'm talking about when he was in his prime. Roy Jones was unbelievable. One of my favorite fighters of all time. He had speed, he had power, he had endurance, he had everything. Great fighter, great combination fighter. If you see some of his older fights, the way he was fighting, he was like a rattlesnake. Man, speed. So, and then I'll mention somebody from the old days, Archie Moore. Archie Moore, fantastic fighter. He's a guy that had like 1 million fights, and his brain, no issue. I would hear him speak when he was old, right? And he was, there were no signs of damage of any kind. I mean, he didn't even seem like he was old. But there's a guy who fought. I forget how old he was, but he was old. I mean, he fought Marciano when he was old. He lost that fight, but that Archie Moore, that's they don't make fighters like that anymore. Yeah, he was another one I enjoyed, listening to, and he was like a philosopher, wizard. He knew he was the mentor of George Foreman. It's like amazing ability, amazing. Who else was out there? I think who's like Ray Boom Boom Mancini. I mentioned him in another video where he changed after the death of the Kim Koo, the South Korean fighter there. Yeah, because it takes it out of you. You're performing in a sport. You're not in it, like a hitman to kill people. And then when that happens, psychologically it hurts you, and you can't fight the same anymore. Floyd Patterson, he was another one that dementia got him bad. He couldn't remember anything at the end. He was in really bad shape. And for me, Floyd Patterson was somebody who I had heard speaking many years before, and I go, that guy, he escaped the damages of boxing, but no. And then the other guy that I thought escaped, but he's suffering now as we speak. He's in bad shape. It's that guy from Canada. Never been knocked out. Fought Ali. But he had a lot of issues. He had a very hard life. Drugs, his kids lost kids to overdoses. His wife committed suicide. It's just horrible, situation. And now, now he's suffering from the effects of boxing. And he wasn't up until, I don't know, not that long ago. I mean, people would hear him talk, and they'd say, he's not bad. He sounds perfect. And I go, yeah, he's one guy that went many fights, and he's sounding okay now. But he could be one of those people that, a lot of people, they never box. They get to be a certain age, 75, 80 years old, and something hits them in life. They get some kind of brain, disease, and then they don't function the same anymore. But they were never boxers. He could be one of those. It could be a coincidence that you were a boxer. You did box for a long time, but you would have gotten that disease anyway. What's his name? Shy. I have to look him up, but yeah, I know it. I just can't think of it right now. When I see it, I'll be like, yes, that's right. It's like a CH name. Shaballo. Let's see. Yeah. You see, I should have remembered that. George Chuvalo, born September 12, 1937. Canadian former professional boxer who was a 5-time Canadian heavyweight champion and a 2-time world champion title challenger. He is known for never having been knocked down in his 93 bouts, professional bouts. He fought Ali, he fought Frazier, he fought Foreman. unsuccessfully challenged for Ali for the heavyweight championship in 1966. Amazing fighter. This guy was built like a bulldozer. He's 88 years old right now, still alive. 93 fights, 73 wins, 63 by knockout, 18 losses, 2 draws. And I think, I read recently that he was really suffering from dementia. But yeah, his life is very sad. You read the stories about his children's death, and it's very, very sad. Then his wife couldn't take it and committed suicide. Let me see. Yeah, so in 2018, a judge ruled that Chuvalo did not have the mental capacity to determine if he wished to reconcile with his wife after living apart for multiple years. And by 2022, he was suffering from advanced dementia. And that's 3 years ago. He's still holding on. So, yeah. But his last fight was a win way back 1978. And he had a string of wins before he retired. He did lose to Ali again in 72. Jimmy Ellis lost. George Foreman lost in 1970. Buster Mathis, he lost. Joe Frazier, he lost. That's a small amount of fighters, and those are high caliber. I mean, those are like, at the top of the boxing game. And, he gave them a good fight. Yeah, lost Ali, He just, he was good, but he didn't have that little bit extra to beat those top guys. So, but he beat everyone else. Lost to Floyd Patterson in 1965. Yeah, and he's still around. He's genetically a very tough person. 88 years old, all that punishment in his life, all that mental punishment, and he's still around. Yeah, I remember he was like a bulldozer. I would say he was much stronger than Ali, but Ali was a better technician. All right, that's it for now. Ciao.